Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moments. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Tales of Herding Gods based on novel. So let's start. In that case, the only chance to kill Dragon Rearing Sovereign was by using Sword Picture to block his vision and having Carefree Sword attack from behind it in an ambush. The instant Dragon Rearing Sovereign broke through Sword Picture, it was the time for Carefree Sword to stab him to death. Qin Mu couldn't defeat him in an open fight, so he could only scheme. The moment Dragon Rearing Sovereign destroyed the first move of Sword Picture, he saw a cold light coming his way. He hurriedly raised his hand to block the heart of his brows, but Carefree Sword pierced through his palm. It went past his forehead and sliced through his brain. Carefree Sword, the divine sword of Qin Hanjin, just the sharpness of the sword was something that one couldn't defend against. Dragon Rearing Sovereign was stunned, and Carefree Sword behind him changed direction to stab his heart from the back until its tip came out from his chest. Qin Mu burst forth with all his magic power. He guided the divine energy inside the sword and shouted at the same time. 8,000 swords rose into the sky and fell toward Carefree Sword. In an instant, Dragon Rearing Sovereign vanished, replaced by a huge, round sword pellet. The sword handles interlocked with each other, making it airtight. They seemed like a huge golden ball that was so round it was flawless. Qin Mu let out a sigh and spat out the blood in his mouth. Wang Muren and the other two reached him and saw the huge round ball, then also sighed in relief. At that moment, the circular ball suddenly moved, and cracks appeared on its sides. It was caused by the sword handles loosening, and it was a sign that the sword pellet was breaking apart. Quickly dodge! Qin Mu shouted out and ran out of the hall frantically. Wang Muren and the rest immediately turned when they saw the situation. Behind them, the huge sword pellet burst open with a loud clang as the flying swords shot off in all directions. The imposing figure of Dragon Rearing Sovereign appeared in the center of all the flying swords, his gaze freezing cold. There was only a small pool of spoiled blood from when the divine blood was hit by the divine energy hidden inside Carefree Sword to mark the earlier attack. The strike from Qin Mu had been pretty sinister and terrifying. If Dragon Rearing Sovereign hadn't covered his body with a pool of blood, he would have died right there and then, under the sword of the crafty brat. The bodies of Qin Mu and the rest flashed as they tried to avoid the sword lights that were shooting over from behind them. The swords were concentrated and there were as many as 8,000 of them, and the sword lights were rushing many times faster than when Qin Mu had executed his sword with his full power. Qi Mu Qingdai was pierced by the sword lights and nailed to a bronze pillar. Even though she was a proud disciple of Little Jade Capital, had extremely powerful cultivation, and cultivated body techniques, she couldn't help it when there were that many flying swords and the swords light were that fast. She didn't manage to avoid all of them completely. Luckily, those swords were Qin Mu's, and Dragon Rearing Sovereign only had the strength of the corporeal body. There was no magic power in his body, so he couldn't execute the power of Qin Mu's flying swords to fatally injure the group. Even so, Mu Qingdai was severely injured. Just when she got hit, Long Yu and Wang Muren's cries could be heard. One of them was nailed to the wall while the other to the ground. Qin Mu grunted as a sword light pierced through his chest. He moved his heart and the sword missed his vitals by a narrow margin. He got nailed to the beam of the palace's door and hung high in the air. Outside the hall, the buck rushed in and got hit by dozens of swords in a split second, which threw it back. Don't you just want the true Dragon Lord? I'll give it to you. Blood was leaking out from the corners of Qin Mu's mouth when he gritted his teeth to circulate his vital qi. The Emperor's disc flew out of his Daotai sack, and he threw it to Dragon Rearing Sovereign while shouting sternly, "You can kill me, but let my 3 friends go." The disciples of Little Jade Capital were moved. Long Yu thought to himself, I held prejudice against human Emperor when he is so loyal to his friends. I only thought about how he is Heavenly Devil Cult Master. That Emperor's disc flew toward Dragon Rearing Sovereign, having already transformed into the shape of a dragon jade. Numerous writings, runes, and pictures flowed and transformed on its body continuously, creating a marvelous image. True Dragon Lord, Dragon Rearing Sovereign became excited, and he raised his hand to catch the Emperor's disc. He sneered, "True Dragon Lord was originally mine, so even if you didn't hand it over, I could have still gotten it after I killed you. His face changed, and he immediately shook his hand to throw the Emperor's disc away. He shouted sternly, "You poisoned it!" His body began to dissolve, becoming shorter rapidly, like an ice cube which had landed on a hot plate. Below his feet was a pool of spoiled blood which was quickly growing. Dragon-rearing Sovereign cried out as his body started to blister. Those blisters popped and out came the heads of tiny flood dragons which opened their mouths to shriek. They struggled to escape, and a few actually managed to do it. However, some of them did it with half of their bodies, the other half having dissolved. Wang Muren and the rest were in a daze. Their minds went blank from the revelation. Qin Mu pulled at the sword holding him nailed with force, but the door beam was too hard, so he couldn't even budge the blade. When he realized it, he immediately gave up on the action and stretched his hand to smack the beam. With a kai sound, the sword penetrated through his body, and he dropped to the ground. Qin Mu stood up, and his eyes brimmed with tears from the pain. He hurriedly poured some bottles of dragon saliva on his wounds and said in a just and forceful manner, "If I can't win, of course I will use poison." Wang Muren and the rest were stunned once again. Qin Mu said those words as though using poison when he couldn't defeat an enemy was right and proper. He made it sound as if it was as simple and obvious as eating and sleeping. The people who taught this human emperor don't seem to have been good people, Long Yu thought. Using poison when one couldn't win was a despicable thing in most people's eyes. This was the main reason why Jade Face Poison King had infuriated numerous people back in the day. However, this kind of thing had no psychological effect on Qin Mu. In his eyes, poisoning someone when one couldn't defeat them was something that was right and proper. Poisoning the opponent was also an ability. His logic went along the lines of, if I can't fight you yet you still come to beat me, poisoning you is a fitting answer. For example, what they faced was not a fair fight from the start. Dragon-rearing Sovereign was a god of high heavens that was high above, so the clone that was formed by his fresh blood also had extremely high abilities. Even strong practitioners of Celestial Being Realm wouldn't be a match for it, let alone Qin Mu and his companions. The opponent was a god, so poisoning him was a normal fight-back method. The poison Qin Mu had used was the 3-break powder he had created when he fought with poisoner Mu Xue of West Earth, who had given the poison its name. It was lucky that he had good habits. Every time he refined a poison or a medicine, he would usually make more so that he would still have half left to keep after putting it to use. Who knew if he might come to need it in the future? Thus, what Qin Mu had spread on the Emperor's disc was none other than 3-break powder. It flipped the 5 phases and messed up the yin and the yang, causing the body to break down, along with the spirit and soul. That was why the poison was called 3-break powder. By using great supplement to nourish itself, it created an incomparably marvelous poison. That kind of poison had been used specifically to deal with the blood of a god and devil in Lonely Mountain Ridge Root Demon. Therefore, it was only right to use it to deal with Dragon-rearing Sovereign's body of blood as well. Back then, Lonely Mountain Ridge Root Demon had been fixed in place by the green dragon bead and couldn't move, so it was easily poisoned. However, Dragon-rearing Sovereign was free to move, so Qin Mu had spread 3-break powder on the Emperor's disc. As long as Dragon-rearing Sovereign touched it, he would be poisoned. Numerous pocket-sized blood flood dragons squirmed in all directions to avoid the Emperor's disc and the spoiled blood, then tried to gather back together. Qin Mu immediately rushed to them while shouting, "If we don't get rid of this god's blood cleanly, none of us will live." His 8,000 flying swords filled the hall, but with his cultivation, he couldn't summon all of them back. His vital chi instead transformed into a thread to sweep up Carefree Sword which was nailed in the pillar, pulling it out. Carefree Sword was a divine sword that was incomparably sharp. Even though it was embedded deep into the pillar, it could still be pulled out, unlike the other swords. Qin Mu gathered his remaining vital chi and executed all kinds of basic sword forms toward the blood flood dragons that were running around on the ground. Long Yu grunted. He couldn't pull out the flying sword in his chest, either, so having learned from Qin Mu's demonstration, he smacked the handle forcefully, and the flying sword went through his chest. Long Yu let out a blood-curdling scream from the pain, then gritted his teeth. But right then, 2 jade bottles flew over. Qin Mu had thrown him some dragon saliva. The youth caught them in a hurry and didn't even have the patience to open the corks. He crushed the 2 jade bottles with force so the dragon saliva would flow out, then used his vital chi to send it to his wound. The effect of the dragon saliva was swift, as the flesh on his chest started to grow back. It felt painful and itchy. Long Yu didn't have the time to care about the immense pain in his chest. He pounced forward to kill the small blood flood dragons that were running randomly in all directions. Wang Muren and Mu Qingdai also did the same thing to break free, losing flesh and blood in the process. Qin Mu threw 2 bottles of dragon saliva to each of them as well, and the 2 of them immediately poured them onto their wounds. If it was under normal circumstances, they would have used their vital chi to force out the clotted blood to prevent any hidden damage, but they had no time to care about that. They controlled their spirit weapons to slaughter the small and delicate blood flood dragons. "Don't step on the spoiled blood," Qin Mu shouted out to them in warning. "The poison I had refined is too strong, so even I can't detox it." The 3 were frightened and immediately became more careful, avoiding the spoiled blood on the ground. The 4 leaped up like rabbits and soared down like falcons as they cut the blood flood dragons one by one. However, their power was still not enough to eradicate all of them, as they were formed by a god's blood. After the dragons were killed, they would instantly reconstruct themselves. Only Qin Mu's carefree sword was able to eradicate a portion of the god's blood. "Lend me your magic power and let's activate this sword together." Wang Muren and the rest immediately roused their vital chi and transformed it into threads that flew toward Carefree Sword. With their magic power pouring in, its power instantly rose drastically. Qin Mu controlled Carefree Sword, and his sword skills burst forth, slicing off the heads of all the flood dragons that were running around. The sword light then suddenly changed to drill sword form as it traveled on the ground like a silver dragon, shredding all the headless bodies. A few of the creatures hugged themselves and rolled on the ground, avoiding the sword light. When the small and delicate dragons stopped, they vanished, and in their place stood Dragon-Rearing Sovereign, who was only a foot tall. "Dragon-Rearing Sovereign, serves you right?" The 4 were both surprised and delighted. They couldn't help laughing out loud. Suddenly, the small and compact Dragon-Rearing Sovereign took a step forward, and his body vanished. The tibia bone of Long Yu's left leg cracked from the kick of the small Dragon-Rearing Sovereign. "Eyes awaken!" Wang Muren shouted out and awakened his divine eyes, but he could only see the small Dragon-Rearing Sovereign moving rapidly. He flashed around like a phantom, to the point it was nearly impossible to capture his figure. Qin Mu executed Carefree Sword to stab over and over again, but his sword kept missing the back of the little one by a narrow margin. It was completely impossible to hit him. "Senior sister, be careful." Just as Wang Muren called out his warning, Dragon-Rearing Sovereign appeared beside Mu Qingdai like a phantom and punched her. Mu Qingdai shouted loudly, and her sashes coiled around the arm of the small Dragon-Rearing Sovereign while she retaliated with a palm strike. Qin Mu arrived and executed Overlord Body 3 Elixir Technique while circulating 9 Transformation 3 Conditions Mystery Technique. His body rapidly shrunk, and he became a small human that was 1 foot tall. Carefree Sword had also become 3 inches long, and he controlled it to attack Dragon-Rearing Sovereign. "Don't clash with him head-on, his strength is immense." Bang! Fresh blood burst out from Mu Qingdai's palm, which got mangled. Qin Mu moved rapidly in the air and used Qi to control his sword to attack Dragon-Rearing Sovereign. The small god avoided Carefree Sword with phantom-like speed. Wang Muren gathered his chi into a net and tried to capture the small Dragon-Rearing Sovereign, but was blasted away. Long Yu stood up on one leg and hopped to Mu Qingdai's side, allying himself with Qin Mu and the rest to attack Dragon-Rearing Sovereign. "His body is too small, which makes it hard to attack. Shrink your bodies," shouted Qin Mu. Mu Qingdai executed a technique from Strange Dao Strict Geo technique, and her body instantly shrunk. She became a 1-foot girl whose hair dragged behind her. On the other side, Wang Muren also shrunk his body and became a tiny thing. Only Long Yu did not cultivate any such techniques, so he could only stand on one leg and put his guard up. He executed Heavenly Eye Sword Heart, and sword lights shot out from his gaze. They moved as the 4 tiny ones moved, but even though his sword eyes were fast, it was still hard for them to capture Dragon-Rearing Sovereign's small and delicate body. He could only see 4 tiny things rushing around in the sky, flashing here and there. Too fast. This is bad. Long Yu saw Dragon rearing Sovereign rushing toward him and hurriedly hopped up with a single leg. The instant he did so, he heard a crisp sound and looked down to see his other leg bending at an unimaginable angle. Crap, he thought. Bat hump. Long Yu fell to ground in a kneeling position, the pain almost making him faint. Dragon rearing Sovereign's body appeared behind his head, and the tip of his foot was aimed straight for the undefended target before it. If he managed to land the kick, Long Yu's head was definitely going to explode. But at that moment, carefree sword that was 3 inches long flashed past and pierced Dragon rearing Sovereign's foot, and the kick missed. Long Yu let out a sigh of relief and ruthlessly turned his neck 180 degrees backward. Sword lights burst forth from his eyes and stabbed Dragon rearing Sovereign's body, blowing him away. I've tried my best. Long Yu shouted. He collapsed on the ground, almost breaking his neck from the twist. Dragon rearing Sovereign flew backward as his feet tapped repeatedly in the air to get rid of the power of the 2 swords. His body was made of fresh blood, so he didn't have any magic power and could only rely on the strength of the corporeal body to deal with Qin Mu and the rest. However, the exhaustion of the god's blood was also quite astonishing. He had no choice but to use the moves of corporeal body divine arts to win. Suddenly, a huge black figure appeared at the door of the hall. The buck, which was covered in swords, climbed up and shook its head. Its horns flew off the head, and one of the small branches stabbed into the back of Dragon rearing Sovereign's heart. Dragon rearing Sovereign's body exploded, countless balls of blood rolling away, and the god became even smaller than he was before. He jumped up from the horns and landed on the bare head of the buck. He punched down, trying to smash in the head of the huge buck. Qin Mu sent his sword over. Dragon rearing Sovereign avoided it, but saw 3 small humans land one after another on the buck's head. The huge buck blinked eyes and revealed a look of terror. With the 4 small humans scuttling here and there on his body, his bones crackled as though they were going to be broken. You, the huge buck cried out in astonishment and hurriedly rushed toward the Dragon Qilin, who was lying in the corner of the huge hall. He tried to push the trouble onto the Dragon Qilin's body. There were also over a dozen flying swords stabbed into the Dragon Qilin's body, but his muscles and bones were limp. He had a natural fear of Dragon rearing Sovereign, which was why he hadn't moved for the whole time. The other flood dragons were sprawled beside him, and some of them were hit by the swords as well. However, they all lay still, not daring to move. It was good that the Dragon Qilin's skin was rough and his flesh was thick. With fat surrounding his whole body, there wasn't much of a problem even if he was stabbed by over a dozen swords. Don't come over, groaned the Dragon Qilin weakly. The huge buck was about to reach him when cracking sounds came from his body. It twisted, and his limbs snapped, causing him to collapse to the ground and slide forward. The Dragon Qilin exhausted all of his strength to turn his body around and crawl away from the buck. The other flood dragons also shifted on the floor and crawled in the other direction with difficulty. The intimidation of Dragon rearing Sovereign was simply too strong, making them unable to resist. Suddenly, Mu Qingdai flew backward and crashed into the Dragon Qilin, who was crawling away with all his strength. She fainted. Dragon rearing Sovereign rushed over, wanting to claim Mu Qingdai's life, and the Dragon Qilin went totally limp, paralyzed on the ground. Qin Mu grabbed carefree sword and shouted loudly, "Brother Murin!" Wang Murin puked out fresh blood as he exerted all his strength to lift Qin Mu up and toss him over. Qin Mu's footsteps tapped repeatedly as he rushed over as fast as lightning. The sword light of the 3-inch sword in his hand rose drastically, and a piece of small and delicate green mountains and blue water poured out from the sword light, drowning Dragon rearing Sovereign. Clanging sounds rang non-stop, and sword-treading mountains and rivers suddenly fell apart. Only the figure of Qin Mu wielding his sword and pouncing over was left. The body of Dragon rearing Sovereign was even smaller, and beneath his feet was even more spoiled blood. He alternated between his fingers and palms to smack carefree sword continuously, and powerful jolts traveled through Qin Mu's body, forcing him to puke blood repeatedly. He thus transformed into a shadow to move along the floor, but Dragon rearing Sovereign gave a punch and blew him out from the ground. Wang Murin shouted loudly, and his hair fluttered in the wind as he rushed over. Two small humans fought fiercely, and among the sparks, the sound of bones breaking could be heard as Wang Muren flew backward. Qin Mu lay on the ground and used the last of his strength to raise his sword to stab downwards. Dragon-rearing sovereign who was 2 inches tall clasped his hands about carefree sword, using all his strength to withstand it. Qin Mu's sword instantly couldn't continue, and he shouted fiercely, "Fatty dragon, do you still want to eat? If I die, you will have to starve to death." The dragon Chilean's eyes were filled with fear when he looked at the tiny dragon-rearing sovereign in a daze. But when he heard the sentence, he suddenly gave a fierce roar and raised his claw to smack down the sword's hilt. Chi! The sword light pierced through dragon-rearing sovereign, and he who was 2 inches tall was split into half. The fresh blood was still squirming and wanted to flow together, but the dragon Chilean gave a furious roar. With magic power flooding into the sword light increased sharply and exploded in all directions. The last of the god's blood withered into spoiled blood and fell lifeless to the ground. Qin Mu was stunned. The strength of his body withdrew like a tide, and his hands that were holding onto the sword loosened. He collapsed on the ground. The dragon Chilean continued to roar fiercely. He raised his claws, wanting to smack once more the sword again, but Qin Mu said weakly, "Stop smacking. If you smack some more, I might just die as well." He coughed violently. His magic power was completely exhausted, and his corporeal body gradually returned back to its normal size. He wanted to crawl up to treat his own injuries, but he couldn't move at all. The dragon Chilean climbed to his feet and looked at the bloodstains on the ground. He then looked at the surroundings and saw the flood dragons that were incomparably powerful not daring to look him in the eyes. Their heads were lowered, their eyes filled with fear. Qin Mu, Wang Muren, Mu Qingdai, and Long Yu were all severely injured and couldn't move. Long Yu's legs were broken, Mu Qingdai had fainted from severe injuries, Wang Muren nearly had all his bones shattered, and Qin Mu's most severe injury was the punch he received when he was a shadow. It had nearly shattered him when he was in the shadow form. The 4 of them just lay on the ground. Long Yu's tongue was stuck, his neck crooked. He had twisted it himself, and it had nearly broken it. He could only look helplessly at the dragon Chilean walking over and stretching out his long tongue to slobber all over him. The dragon Chilean flipped him over and licked him once more. Long Yu got turned over, but his tongue still didn't retract. The dragon Chilean licked him again, covering the whole person in drool. His body became itchy. It was the itch of broken bones growing back, his tendons reconnecting, and his flesh growing back. He executed his vital chi and used it to adjust the bones to prevent them from reattaching themselves in a crooked way. If he didn't do that, he'd end up with problems in moving even if his injuries were healed. Wang Muren, who had collapsed a bit farther away, couldn't help giggling when he saw how his senior brother was covered in drool. The huge tongue of the dragon Chilean kept flipping him over and over as though he was scared of the man being burnt. The youth laughed until his wounds opened up. The pain made tears roll down his face. The dragon Chilean walked over to him and stretched out his long tongue, and Wang Muren could no longer laugh. He saw the dragon Chilean's tongue cover his face like a slimy carpet. It then flipped him over and over again. After the dragon Chilean was done with Wang Muren, he also licked Mu Qingdai, who was unconscious, and made the girl all wet. Mu Qingdai woke up from the licking and could only remain acting unconscious to spare herself the embarrassment. The dragon Chilean walked towards Qin Mu, but he said weakly, "Don't lick me. Senior brother Long Yu, how are your injuries? There are some jade bottles in my Daotai sack that contain dragon saliva. It will be fine if you just take them out and spread it over my wounds. Lick him. Big F, dragon, you must lick him." Long Yu immediately shouted. Wang Muren nodded repeatedly and added in a shout, "We all got licked, so how could we let him off? Big dragon, lick." Mu Qingdai also opened her eyes in a hurry, no longer acting like she was sleeping. She smiled and said, "To enjoy blessings and endure misfortune together, boss dragon, lick." Qin Mu's expression changed drastically. He wanted to crawl away, but the dragon Chilean raised his claw to press down on the corner of his pants. Qin Mu couldn't move and became furious. "Fatty dragon, there's poison on my body. If you lick me, you will die by bleeding from all your orifices." The dragon Qin hesitated for a moment, and the three disciples of Little Jade Capital laughed. Who will apply poison on their body? Fatty dragon, just lick him to your heart's content. We will bury you if you die from poison. The dragon Qin was finally at ease. He licked Qin Mu until he was upside down and totally drenched him. The youth was his meal master, so he naturally had to be more attentive. He licked Qin Mu more carefully than the others. Qin Mu's face was black when he got flipped around. He didn't move nor struggle, seemingly having accepted his fate. The dragon Qin pulled back his tongue. When he saw Qin Mu's hairstyle that was messed up by him, he hurriedly licked it smooth for Qin Mu until it was slick and shiny. Enough, fatty dragon, great cult master Qin said sternly, enough, stop licking. It's fine now, it's very smooth already. Stop licking. The dragon Qin saw that he was furious and pulled his tongue back reluctantly. His front claws rested on his hind legs as he squatted nearby. Qin Mu had a stubborn strand of hair that hung down to the corner of his left eye. The dragon Qin hesitated for a moment, then took a glance at Qin Mu's face. It was black as charcoal. But the dragon Qin couldn't resist it and quickly stretched out his tongue to lick the strand of hair back in place. Qin Mu went into a frenzy. The huge buck on the ground laid with all his legs shattered. When Qin Mu and the rest transformed into small humans to fight with dragon-rearing sovereign, they had tormented the buck quite a bit. Luckily, its life hadn't been endangered, it's just that his injuries were quite heavy. When the buck saw the dragon Qin curing Qin Mu's injuries, he immediately pouted and shouted, "Hey, hey! Fatty, lick me, lick me!" Bah! The dragon Qin spat a mouthful of dragon saliva in front of the huge buck and said arrogantly, "Rub it on yourself." The huge buck was furious, but healing himself was more important. He could only move his body with difficulty to rub the dragon saliva on his wounds. All throughout it, he kept twitching from pain. The dragon Qin looked at him rubbing himself in his saliva and felt delighted. This damn buck keeps putting me down in front of my meal master, not leaving me any face. Now I shall let him know how powerful I am and humiliate him in front of his meal master. Fatty Dragon instantly felt that the happiest moment in his life wasn't when he had hugged the young patriarch's leg to beg for a meal, but the one right then. Qin Mu and the rest gradually recovered some strength and all sat up to mobilize their vital qi. They forced the clotted blood in their bodies out to prevent any hidden injuries from being left behind. The three from Little Jade Capital had also learned the art of healing before, and their abilities weren't weak. It was only when compared to Qin Mu that they were lacking. There were many places in which they weren't meticulous. Qin Mu pushed the clotted blood out from his body and mobilized his vital qi to squeeze his shattered bones bit by bit out of his body. With a low shout, his primordial spirit flew out to check on his limbs and bones, examining the situation of his body as well as the injuries on his divine treasures. He examined them in incomparably fine detail, and his primordial spirit returned back to his body. He consumed a few Spirit Buddha pills to quickly replenish his spirit and raise his vital qi. He then took medication according to his symptoms and refined pills to cure his hidden injuries. Primordial spirit. Mu Qingdai gasped, and astonishment spread across her face. Wang Muren and Long Yu's mind were also blown. Primordial spirit was not something that could be cultivated at Qin Mu's realm, so they would have never thought to see Qin Mu actually execute it. Even though Qin Mu's primordial spirit was still weak and small, looking like a faint shadow, it was indeed his primordial spirit. Qin Mu cultivating the primordial spirit on Six Directions realm meant that he held an advantage in cultivation. His speed would be much faster than that of the others. Primordial spirit was also one of the more important battle methods after Celestial Being realm. Since he was already in contact with it, the raising of his abilities was really important. Just then, Qin Mu had awakened the eyes of his primordial spirit to check on his own body. What puzzled the group though was that they didn't know how he had cultivated it. Human Emperor is truly powerful, I'm completely won over. Long Yu sighed and said, to be able to cultivate primordial spirit on Six Directions realm and even make his primordial spirit leave his body, Human Emperor's aptitude and comprehension are indeed the first in this world. Qin Mu shook his head and walked toward Mu Qingdai to examine her body. My comprehension and aptitude aren't the first in the world. Cultivating a primordial spirit on 6 directions realm isn't anything remarkable either. Sister Yushio has also cultivated it. It's actually not hard to cultivate the primordial spirit. Sister Yushio and I cultivated it carelessly and our primordial spirits just left our bodies, he said. Speechless, Long Yu shook his head. The 6th Princess of Eternal Peace Empire has also cultivated the primordial spirit. Eternal Peace Empire is truly not to be underestimated. There are truly many experts in the younger generation. If I shut myself in Little Jade Capital, I may just fall behind times. Wang Muren said with awe. He began to worry. There were many divine techniques in Little Jade Capital, and any of the ultimate arts would be enough to start a sect if taken out, but with Eternal Peace Empire's reform blazing like wildfire, the skills changed, and the paths also changed. Divine arts would evolve accordingly too. If Little Jade Capital didn't catch up with the reform, they would definitely be eliminated. Qin Mu and 6th Princess Ling Yushio cultivating their primordial spirits on 6 directions realm together was just one of the signs of the reform. Qin Mu and Ling Yushio did not know how great of an impact this act of theirs would have on other cultivators. If they could find a way to cultivate the primordial spirit so early and spread it, they would be acclaimed as grandmasters, gaining high positions in the history of cultivation. They would definitely be placed on the same level as Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor and may even surpass him. Imperial Preceptor founding the 3 other basic sword forms was also one of the signs of reform, and it established his accomplishments of a Grandmaster. On top of that, the importance of cultivating the primordial spirit on 6 directions realm was even greater than that of the 3 basic sword forms. It would benefit all divine arts practitioners from 6 directions realm and upwards, allowing their cultivation on every realm to increase drastically. Wang Muren told Qin Mu his idea, and Qin Mu was stunned. He said, I had not thought about this. However, what you said is very logical. When I'll return to the capital, I will discuss this with Sister Yushio. We might just be able to discover how it came to be. He used Cyan Heaven's eyes to examine the ins and outs of Mu Qingdai's body and checked on all the hidden injuries. He then refined spirit pills for her. Mu Qingdai was slightly bashful from his penetrating gaze. He's a divine physician, he's a divine physician, she kept repeating to herself in her head. She then heard divine physician Qin muttered softly, the structure of a woman's body seems to be different from that of a man. If they don't have that thing, how do they pee? Mu Qingdai's face went red, and she glared at him. Qin Mu hurriedly went over to check on Long Yu's injuries, and after some time, he finished treating the injuries of his companions. The dragon Qilin wobbled over and mumbled, Cult Master, look at the swords in my body. There were still over a dozen flying swords stuck in his body. Qin Mu took a glance at him and sneered. Is my hair still messy? All the strands are neat. Wait a minute, this strand of hair is messy. Just as the dragon Qilin stretched his tongue out, Qin Mu raised his arm and signaled with his fingers. The dozen or more flying swords flew out of the dragon Qilin's body at once, and pillars of blood spurted out. The dragon Qilin screamed miserably. Try licking again. Qin Mu told him ruthlessly. Even though he said so, he still took out bottles of dragon saliva to quickly pour it on the wounds. He used his vital chi to help squeeze out the clotted blood, then sealed his wounds. The dragon Qilin tried to curry favor and said, Cult Master, now that I've done a great merit, my rations. Qin Mu ignored him and went to the huge buck, which was in a much worse shape than the dragon Qilin. There are 3 times as many swords in its body, and it still had to roll around in the saliva on the ground. Qin Mu shook his head and helped the huge buck set his bones back in place. He then took over a dozen bottles of dragon's saliva to help him stop the bleeding before pulling out the flying swords. Wang Muren's injuries were much better. He picked up the buck's horns back and ran over to stab them back into its head. Young master, the horns are inserted wrongly, the buck told him. Oh. Wang Muren immediately pulled the horns out again, causing blood to spurt. The buck exhaled in pain, and Wang Muren immediately turned the horns around to stab them back in. He asked Qin Mu for a bottle of dragon's saliva to pour on the wound. Qin Mu then treated the injuries of the flood dragons. After being busy for half a day, the sky outside suddenly turned snow white. The next moment, though, it became pitch black with lightning flashing again. Everyone looked outside in a hurry and saw that the heavy rain had stopped. A tear could be seen in the sky as though a huge sword had sliced it open. Qin Mu's heart trembled violently as he muttered, "Sunshot divine cannon." Trails of red lines came down from the torn sky, and Qin Mu raised his hand to catch one. However, his complexion changed suddenly, and he hurriedly avoided it. The trails of red lines pitter-pattered on the palaces in front of them. Wherever they landed, flowers bloomed throughout the mountains while the grass and trees grew frantically. God's blood fell from the sky as though heaven was grieving. A god had fallen. This video will end here.